Hello and welcome to this tutorial series that should get you up and running with making your own games in the Unity engine, from limited to no experience. I'd like to quickly go through the setup for these videos so we're all on the same page. We'll start with a topic like navigating Unity's engine and spend time going through it. After that, I'll end with a practice exercise that I'll leave the video on. Next video, we'll start with how to complete the exercise and move on to a new topic. If anyone has any questions, please let me know in the comments and I will do my best to help. Let's go! We're going to start as if you're opening Unity for the first time, for which most of you need to simply select the Personal Edition, which is free to use. Now we're at the project view, which will go ahead and do a 3D project called Tutorial. You can save the project wherever you like, but I'm going to put it on my E drive and go ahead and create it. Welcome to Unity! Unity is pretty good about consolidating what's in front of you with things you'll actually need. Not as good as Photoshop, but a heck of a lot better than Maya. There's 5 current windows in this layout that we're looking at: Scene, Game, Hierarchy, Project, and Inspector. The Scene window is what you can consider the editing view. If I go ahead and quickly make a cube, you'll get a better understanding. Don't worry about taking in the creation of objects yet, because we'll cover that later. Here you see the cube in the top left. We can rotate it, move it, select it, and edit it in any way. There's a button to select how you view the objects, like wireframe, but we'll stay shaded. There's a 2D toggle button if you want to eliminate the third dimension, a lighting toggle to eliminate light effects, a sound toggle, and an effects drop-down that lets you choose which effects to show in editing mode. The gizmos aren't necessary for what we're doing, so we're going to ignore those for now. The bottom left game screen is what your game will look like when it's released. The left button lets you select if you have multiple displays in one scene. The aspect selector allows you to see the camera in a specific aspect ratio. The scaler lets you close up on something, which I've honestly never used. The maximize on play is for when you test your scene if you want this panel to take up the whole screen like this. The mute audio mutes the audio in the game. The stats toggle is good for keeping an eye on how much your scene is doing at once. The gizmos toggle is where you look at what you selected in the editing panel drop down above, but we're going to ignore that. Now for the hierarchy. The hierarchy is a scene-specific collection of the game objects. This is a good word to start getting used to, because everything in your Unity project will be called a game object. As a way to drill this into you, I'm going to make a little game object pop-up that dings every time I say it, but only for this video. But it's that important. You can select game objects from either the scene view or the hierarchy. There's a create button here, but you can also reach this menu from right-clicking on the hierarchy panel or simply going to the game object tab. Unity is good about giving you a lot of redundant ways to do everything. The untitled dropdown is the current scene name, and it's good to remember that if this says untitled, you most likely haven't saved your scene yet. There's a search bar that allows you to search for specific game objects in your scene. Next, we have the Project tab. This is the assets that are used in your project. It's important to note that every time you put an asset in your Unity project, it duplicates it and keeps one locally in your Unity Assets folder. You can right-click folders here and make more folders, or you can use the Create button, which has much more power than in the Hierarchy window. This allows you to make pretty much any type of file you might need in a game, not necessarily game object specific. It will become more important in future videos. Finally, we have the Inspector tab. You might have noticed as we selected the different game objects in our scene that this tab shows the different variables we can edit on the game objects. It's completely dependent on what is selected in the hierarchy. It specializes in showing you all the scripts on each of the game objects, and we can go ahead and look at that more when we're creating them in later videos. Now let's start with the buttons above the panels. At the top right, the first button here is a selection of pre-made layouts. There's a couple of choices here that benefit 3D, like the 4-split, but for most cases, we're going to stick with the 2x3 option. Next to that is the Layers button, which isn't something to worry about now, but as game scenes become more complex, it's a good way to sort through what you want to see. The Account tab is purely up to you what email you want to create and link to Unity. It will allow you to download assets from the store and upgrade to Plus and Pro editions. The Cloud option is for cloud utilizing Unity's analytics and services. Not necessary for us, nor is the Collab button. The three central buttons are what allow you to play your scene. The left one simply starts the scene. The middle button allows you to pause the scene at its current frame, and then the forward one allows you to progress at 1 frame per click. The next two buttons are pivot points for your tools on the left. They can mostly stay in center and global, and that's about all you'll deal with them. These 6 buttons are very important. We'll go left to right and start with selecting the cube. The first button is the hand tool, which allows you to move around the edit view without augmenting any of the game objects. The next button, the translation button, this is just for changing a game object's position. Next is the rotation button. Then there's the scaling button. The rect button is mostly for editing sprites in 2D. And then the final button allows you to edit the position, rotation, and scale all in one. I'd honestly avoid this one for now while you're learning. Now for the taskbar at the top. File lets you save and open scenes as well as projects. We're going to go in depth on things like the build settings towards the end. The Edit tab is mostly used to edit project settings, but that will also be another video. The Assets/Create tab lets you do what you can do by clicking Create in the Project panel. The GameObjects tab lets you do what you could do with the Create button in the Hierarchy panel. The Component tab will become redundant later when we're editing particular game objects. The Window tab is probably the most important for editing different panels that aren't included in the 2x3 view. The Animation and Animator panels will wind up being very important as we move on. Now it's time for the exercise. Now to test what you've learned in this tutorial, I'd like you to start off by making separate folders in your Asset folder for scripts, art, scenes, and prefabs. I'd like you to set the camera aspect ratio in the bottom left to 16:9. Then save the current scene in the new scenes folder called Test Scene. Finally, open and move the Animator and Animation panels next to the Scene and Game panels. The final view should look like this. This should only take you a minute or so, but it's really good stuff to know in the long run. Feel free to explore more of what you can do, and thank you so much for watching.